Welcome to the Skeptic Zone, the podcast from Australia for science and reason.
Yes, it's the Skeptic Zone podcast, episode number 676 for the 19th of September 2021. Richard Saunders coming to you from Yeo Park. A nice big park not far from the Skeptic Zone studios. I thought I'd get out, stretch my legs and have a look, since the restrictions have changed recently, which lets more people come out and simply enjoy picnics together. I think the idea is that groups of 5 people can enjoy a picnic as long as they're double vaccinated or something like that. So lots of people taking advantage of this. Dogs, as you can hear. It's just nice to see. It's a nice spring day here in Sydney. It's just nice to see people out and about enjoying this weather. There's a coffee shop at the top of the hill here in the park, but people are wearing masks to get their coffee, so that's also good to see. Well, apart from that, what's coming up on this week's episode of the Skeptic Zone podcast? We're going to kick off with the discussion I had with my friends Rob Palmer and Susan Gerbic, inspired by a talk I gave about the Great Australian Prediction Project and a question I was asked about, well, what's the harm in people believing in psychics and predictions and things like that? And that inspired Rob Palmer to contact me. Oh, that's a nice car. There he goes. Not many cars these days. To contact me and initiate a discussion about, well, what is the harm? You know, people believing in bad advice or good advice or mystical advice, or it's a very interesting issue. Is it harmful for people to read their horoscopes and get a giggle? Does it lead to worse things? You might find this discussion interesting. Also, as we chat about that, we mention the website sorryantivaxxer.com, which is a controversial website which lists basically dead anti-vaxxers and their social media posts railing against the flu jab. COVID is a hoax. I'm not going to get the flu shot. Masks are a bad idea, this sort of thing. And then it lists their posts as they're in hospital and then their obituary. It's quite stark. I wonder what you think about that. After that, it's another report from our dear late friend Shelley Stocken. And Shelley, way back in 2017, was looking at the activities of Robert De Niro and Robert F. Kennedy Jr. when it comes to vaccination. A great classic report from Shelley Stocken, and we miss you very much, Shelley. And to round off the show, it's a dive back into the Trove archives, where we look at the Spanish flu epidemic of 1919. What were people saying? What were they doing? What were the reports of the time? And you will be absolutely amazed on how similar the attitudes then are to the attitudes now, especially when it comes to certain people not wishing to wear masks. And even as I wander around this park away from everybody, oh, it's great to see kids in the playground on the swings. I'm wearing a mask, and it's good to see lots of other people are too, even though I think there are family groups and anyway, people out here enjoying the day. And what's this? Ooh, there's a family group over there having a nice picnic. Cheesecake? They're eating cheesecake in the park? How dare they? Where's my invitation? I know somebody who loves cheesecake. Maybe you love cheesecake too. I certainly do. Whoa! Sorry, I'm just being surrounded by these strange birds who are swooping low. It's all happening out here in the park. Well, while I dream of cheesecake and wander around, I hope you enjoy the Skeptic Zone. Don't do that, I was just about to start. Folks, you have no idea how hard it is to do a podcast sometimes. You line up these international guests and they just goof off before the interview starts. It's Susan Gerbic from Guerrilla Skepticism on Wikipedia and Rob Palmer, the well-known skeptic. Hello, people.
Hello.
Hello.
Hello. We're all Zooming together, which is the world's come to this. We all Zoom together these days. We don't meet in person. We used to. We will again one day. Now, Rob, you've prompted this little session because you saw a presentation I did just in the last week for the Bay Area Skeptics, all about the Great Australian Prediction Project, which you've been a part of now for well over a year. And you kindly said you enjoyed my talk, and folks, I'll link to that in this week's show notes. But you made the point that maybe I could have spoken more about the topic, and our friend Tim Farley used to talk about this. What's the harm? And I was asked that question, what's the harm in psychic predictions? And I gave a short answer because there was many areas to cover. But I understand that you've got quite a take on this.
Your answer to the Q&A, what's the harm, was reasonable, and you were thinking off the cuff, and you said, well, if the psychic tells somebody, to do something with their lives, like invest in stock or make a life choice, and then they're just making stuff up, you could be messing yourself up, and, that could be the harm. But because I talk about this sort of thing at conferences, I talked about it at SciCon, at DragonCon, I wrote papers on it, so my take on it goes a little further than that. Mm-hmm. So it's that having these kind of beliefs and any event which fosters these kind of beliefs that people can do these things leads people to make awful choices about going to a neighborhood psychic, and those people, in some cases, get their lives destroyed.
Hmm. So yes, I seem to remember that when they were asking me what's the harm in making predictions, and my short answer, I guess, was along the lines of, well, people who just write weekly columns for newspapers and then they're forgotten about 2 days later, you can argue there's little harm in that, but where the big harm comes is when people rely on these people to give them life advice and financial advice and health advice.
Right. And in fact, there's a large segment of the population, this is a under-the-radar, underreported problem, that go to a neighborhood psychic and the person is a total con artist and will take them for every dollar they can get from them. Mm. And we've learned this from a detective named Bob Nygaard, who tries to give victims back their money, has a very tough time doing that because the law is not on your side, because a lot of times they won't arrest the person. If they do, they'll say, well, they didn't have a gun to your head, why'd you give them any money? And people have lost literally millions of dollars. I mean, that's the upper extreme, but people lose their life savings. They go bankrupt. They'll get another mortgage and give the money to the psychic. And just because they have believed in these things. So, my feeling about this is any kind of media outlet which promotes these people or makes it look like it could be real, puts that idea in people's heads, and then they're much more likely to be devastated by that.
I think you make a very good point. I guess you can say there are degrees of it, ranging from the outright con sharks out there, out to get every dollar they can, all the way down to the person around the corner who does readings and foretells the future with an innocent outlook. But ultimately, yes, there's a lot of harm in that.
Okay, so I hope you put this in the show notes. The article that I did that started me being interested in this topic was written in Skeptical Inquirer. You could Google my name, Rob Palmer, with belief in psychics, what's the harm, and who's to blame. And I laid out all of the problems that this can cause in people's lives financially. And you might not want to put this whole thing in, but you can edit it. I will read my last 3 sentences.
All right.
To summarize, despite the persistent lack of confirming proof, and despite all evidence to the contrary, this ubiquitous psychic powers reported in the media collectively reinforces the average person's belief that this imaginary phenomenon is real. This contributes, at least in part, to convincing people that a psychic can help solve their problems, and this needlessly exposes them to the possibility of destructive, unrecoverable financial loss at the hands of con artists or masters of psychological manipulation. It seems apparent that any and all media outlets perpetrating the public's belief in psychic powers has substantial bloodstains all over their hands.
Now, Susan, with your work on guerrilla skepticism and Wikipedia, what's your take on the harm that some of these psychics and fortune tellers might do?
Well, in the Australian Prediction Project, these, fluffy magazines, I think, they're writing a prediction about what's happening in Nicole Kidman's life, and there's going to be some sort of, the prices are going to rise in Australia in real estate or something like that. That's just kind of silly filler kind of stuff. What the problem I see is more the media. They're really pandering to women and this gossipy kind of nature, and I think it's a bit demeaning. And I also think that it's wrong that they don't follow up. And I think that they should be at least coming back with an end of the year review of how they did. I don't like that they're putting these things out and just like, okay, and then next week we have another prediction and it's just equally as silly and none of it's right. I feel like it's just allowing this as filler in all these newspapers and giving these psychics a platform because of course, they're getting this platform and they're going on and getting personal readings, and they're able to sell their website, and people are like, oh, like I read in that magazine, oh yeah, they're fabulous. It's free advertising to them, and I doubt they're paid for their work in the magazine. Maybe they are, maybe they aren't for the predictions, but it's just advertising, and it's insulting. It's insulting to our intelligence, and especially insulting to them being what we call women's magazines. I'm a bit kind of disgusted with the magazines putting those out and thinking that women are so shallow that we really care about what these celebrities are wearing and who they're dating and Plucky Venus and all that other nonsense that they put out there. It's just, come on now, let's have a little more intelligence and maybe a little more respect for your readership.
Yeah. Well, I mean, as we well know, the number one person listed, mentioned, predicted about in the whole project is Nicole Kidman, of course. And I will run the stats later. Folks, I'm working on the very long paper which will accompany the publication of the Great Australian Prediction Project. But we have 213, I counted today, psychics and seers in the project, 213. And, the number one person predicted about is Nicole Kidman.
Richard, I really wanted to say, too, that I was really impressed with the talk you gave to the Bay Area Skeptics.
Oh, thank you.
I've been a part of this for a while, a little over, we've been doing this on Zoom since June of 2020.
Yeah.
And it's really eye-opening to look at the work that the team has done and we really take it seriously. Well, okay, we laugh a lot. But we do take it seriously, these claims that are made. And we try to really do our best work to see if they are accurate or not. But when you did the presentation to the Bay Area Skeptics, I was really amazed, just amazed at how much work you put into this. I was looking at the spreadsheet because, I've got a copy of that too. And whenever we would come up with something, we would say, is that transcribed right? Is that correct? And you'd say, hold on. And you would go back to the original photograph you had taken of that entry. And you had it at your fingertips. And it was just looking at the spreadsheet and the amount of work you have done on this before it even got to our Zoom prediction project. I was shocked at going through page by page, each magazine, having to go to libraries. And now those are some incredible libraries. I want you to know, I would love to spend some time in the Melbourne State Library.
Oh, it's amazing.
Beautiful.
Yeah. It's beautiful. Yeah.
But I've been there a couple of times. It's incredible.
Yeah.
I remember back when you were doing the reports from those and you were talking about doing that, gathering that information.
Here we
are. Little did I know we'd be actually part of
it. It's an incredible amount of work. And anybody who, thinks this is a frivolous kind of thing to do, this is what we do. This is what skeptics should do, is to follow up and do the work, tedious as it is.
Well,
and see how to work out. Let's check it out. I mean, it could have been accurate. It could have been 60% correct.
Yeah.
We didn't know.
Well, in all honesty, we weren't expecting it to be thus, as you say, but we were interested to see what it really was. And yes, it's a lot of, it certainly is a lot of tedious work. Now, before we wrap this up, I just want to get your opinion on a slightly different topic now. A website came to my attention a couple of weeks ago, which is called Sorry Anti-Vaxxer, which is with 2 X's, sorryantivaxxer.com, which is getting mixed reactions because it lists and gives you pictures, photographs of anti-vaxxers on Facebook, TikTok, Instagram, whatever, who are dead from COVID. And in many cases, you can click on the picture of the poor deceased person, and we do have sympathy, and read their screenshots of their anti-vax, COVID is a hoax, conspiracy theory postings. And you just got to scroll through page after page after page, and there's their life stories. And it's absorbing and heartbreaking, and I just don't know what to think. What do you think of this, Susan?
I know exactly what you mean. It's like a train wreck, I guess. You just can't not look. And I think we're all fatigued. It's been, Australia and New Zealand are just kind of experiencing what America has been experiencing for the last 18 months. And, I'm an empathetic person. I pride myself on being sympathetic to people, but at some point you're just sick and tired of it, especially since these people did not have to die.
Yeah.
And I found that website when I see a tweet come up, because, I get a notification, there's a new tweet, and I quickly click on it because I'm curious. And I don't know what to think. Some of the comments are horrendous and they're cruel and it's horrible. But I also kind of think they're venting because they're just sick and tired of it as well. And it's such a frustrating thing to see that these people, how they fell into these beliefs, because you can follow them. I mean, it shows you the comments and the posts they made.
Yeah.
And this anti-vax site also has come to a conclusion after doing this for a couple months they've been doing it, is that these are they're sharing the same memes over and over. And it's just memes. They're sharing on their Facebook pages, and they see them over and over. And I think that's an interesting look into how social media is fueling owning the libs or whatever they're trying to do. It's sad as heck, but I don't know what to think of it. I don't comment, but I have been reading it. It is a really interesting look into these people's lives.
It is. Yes. What's your take on that, Rob?
Well, it is depressing looking at it. And I understand the venting because, a lot of us realize this is going on because of these people and people like them, right? If everyone was getting vaccinated when it was available, we would not be in the situation we're in. So I do understand that. And by the way, on the page, not everyone has died. I just scanned it.
Yes, not everyone. Yes. Many of them have, and a lot of them are listed as being very ill or gravely ill.
Yes, currently in ICU or having recovered. And then it's interesting to look at what's on their, the current information, having recovered. I feel less sorry for the people who every once in a while you come across who was a public figure, who was promoting the anti-vaccine.
Radio hosts and things like that.
Yep. Yeah. And there's certainly a lot of them, unfortunately, also.
I tell you what really gets me. I'm just looking at a section here on the front page, and we've got somebody by the name of Josh G. Britt, who was only 36, of Greenville, Tennessee. Anti-vaxxer died of COVID. Okay. But when I then read the next entry on this page, happens to be a nurse by the name of Jane Holston, who was my age. Anti-vaxxer dead of COVID. And that strikes home more than the 36. I mean, sympathies for the 36, that's so young. But when you read of somebody your own age, somebody who's been on the same journey as you on the planet, has the same memories of the 70s and the 80s and everything, otherwise probably healthy, dies of COVID because she was an anti-vaxxer and
I'm just scrolling through it. Someone 30 years old, someone 40 years old, 41, 38. Yeah.
It's heartbreaking.
It is heartbreaking.
And, this is on our site. We didn't come up with this idea. And it's out there. So,
it's out there.
I mean, it does feel like, okay, I want to look at it. I don't know why. I'm a social historian. I'm very interested in people and why they think the way they think and what they do. And there's a lot of sympathy, and sometimes there's a lot of just downright frustration. And I wish I could have just grabbed him by the shoulders and shook him before this thing happened. I have a couple of friends who refuse to be vaccinated, and I don't even know them anymore. The people I knew they're not them, and they're not on the right. They're on the left. They're on the extreme left, and they just have bought into this. It's mixed. Nothing I can say.
It really is strange. I know the feeling. There are people I've known for years who have written to me with conspiracy videos saying, that the vaccine is a hoax and all the COVID is a hoax. It's very depressing in a sense. Folks, look, I'll link to that website in the show notes. It's called sorryantivaxxer.com, and I would be interested in your opinion, my listening audience. If you have an opinion on this site, please leave a comment on our Facebook page. That's the Skeptic Zone Facebook page. You can leave a comment under the listing for this episode, and a link to that page is on skepticzone.tv.
I think I'm going to go pet a kitten or something.
We're going to play trivia shortly. That'll boost your spirits.
We're just about to play trivia, but let me end this segment on something I posted to my own Facebook page just yesterday. I wrote the following. We live in interesting times, which is more than I can say for the thousands of vaccine deniers and conspiracy theorists who are not living. They are dead from COVID-19. The thought occurs to me that some of them, many of them, are making pleas from their deathbed as they gasp for air, for others not to make the same mistake and begging them to get vaccinated. Yet they themselves did not listen to those before them, who are now dead, when they made the same plea. Maybe some people will get the message. It is also a sad reflection of our times that vaccine deniers and conspiracy theorists will turn on their dying comrades in an instant, labelling them as shills or crisis actors for Big Pharma or the One World Government or whatever. Then it comes full circle when they themselves end up gasping for air and being labelled shills. Maybe a class action, I am looking at you, USA, against those who push COVID-19 conspiracy theories, if they are still alive, should be launched by the people who have suffered or the families of those who have died.
Wow.
And on that happy note, thank you very much, Susan Gerbic and Rob Palmer.
I think I'm going to have to go pet two kittens. Yeah. I'm going to have to find you some kittens to play with.
Where you do that. But for now, thank you very much, Susan Gerbic and Rob Palmer.
Thank you, Richard.
Thank you.
Hi, this is Heidi Robertson from the Northern Rivers Vaccination Supporters. We are a group of concerned citizens dedicated to promoting good science and common sense in our region, the far north coast of New South Wales. This area, famous for its natural beauty and relaxed lifestyle, also has the lowest rates of vaccination in Australia. We are out to change that by challenging the myths and misinformation and by providing good evidence-based information to the community. We'd love for you, no matter where you are in the world, to join our fight. Please visit our webpage at www.nrvs.info. We also have a link there to our Facebook page. Tweet us at NRVaxSupporters, that's VAX, and check us out on Wikipedia by searching for Northern Rivers Vaccination Supporters. Thank you.
Interesting claims. Questioning. Take stock with Shelley Stocken.
Hi, I'm Shelley Stocken, and today I'm talking about anti-vaccine actors. By now you've probably heard about the press conference held last week by Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and his World Mercury Project, which launched a challenge to find, quote, a peer-reviewed scientific study demonstrating that thimerosal is safe in the amounts contained in vaccines currently being administered to American children and pregnant women, end quote. Prominently featured in the promotion of this challenge and present at the media conference was Robert De Niro, who most recently dipped his toe in the cauldron of vaccine denial when he included, then cancelled, a showing of Andrew Wakefield's Vaxxed documentary at his 2016 Tribeca Film Festival. I, like many others watching on, have been asking myself, what has De Niro got to do with vaccine safety? He's an actor, for crying out loud. If, like me, you've ever applauded a performance by De Niro in a feature film, the sight of him sitting, mostly mute, at this outpouring of well-worn, debunked anti-vaccine tropes parading as a press conference is both sad and baffling. Sad because it's hard to accept that De Niro, who has an autistic son, has been tempted by the poisoned apple of vaccine denialism. Baffling because even if De Niro had a strong, evidence-based message to share concerning vaccine safety, sitting on a stool in a press club with his mouth shut isn't a very good way to share it. De Niro's an actor. His most effective medium of communication is film. So I thought, why don't I pitch him a screenplay so he can really get his, or rather Kennedy's, message across to his usual audience? So here it is, my pitch. I hope you're listening, Mr. De Niro, as I present to you Finding Mercury, a film by me. The opening credits fade as we begin the first scene. Interior, Police Chief Kennedy's office. Day. Detective De Niro enters. De Niro, you wanted to see me, sir? Kennedy, close the door. De Niro closes the door behind him, looking interested. Kennedy, I got something for you. Something big. De Niro, what kind of thing? Kennedy, it's kind of a missing persons case. De Niro, whoa. You know that's not my style. I do funny grandpas, mobsters, stuff like that. Kennedy, don't give me any shtick over this. You're all we have. De Niro, what about Wakefield, Big Tree, one of those guys? Kennedy, they ain't doing so well at the box office, if you know what I mean. De Niro, okay. What exactly am I looking for? Kennedy, we want you to find safe vaccines. De Niro, safe? What exactly do you mean by safe? Kennedy, well, you know, vaccines without mercury in them. De Niro, wasn't mercury removed from all vaccines in the childhood schedule back in the 90s? Kennedy, God damn it, you'll have to go deeper than that, De Niro. Get out. And don't come back until you find me a safe vaccine according to my very specific definition of safe, which could change at any time. Time passes. Exterior, a park bench in a city somewhere. Day. Police Chief Kennedy sits on a bench in civilian clothes, feeding pigeons. As Detective De Niro approaches, he looks up, giving a slight nod hello. De Niro, Chief. Kennedy, it's a good day for good news, Bob. You got any? De Niro sits down slowly next to Kennedy on the bench. They both look out into the distance. De Niro, thing is, Chief, I asked around. I spoke to doctors, nurses, scientists, busy moms, and they all pointed to the kids. Kids, Chief. Thousands of them running around, in playgrounds, schools, malls, everywhere. It was as if they'd never even heard of polio or mumps or subacute sclerosing panencephalitis. And you know what? Kennedy, tell me. De Niro, not one of those kids could tell me where the safe vaccines were. Not one. I got nothing for you, Chief. Kennedy looks down at his feet. I knew it. There are no safe vaccines. Fade out.
ただいま聞いていただいているポッドキャストはオーストラリアから The Skeptic Zone という科学と論理のポッドキャストです。英語は世界中で数ある言葉の一つですが、このポッドキャストはいろいろな国の言葉で紹介します。www.skepticzone.tv を調べて、ホームページの下までにスクロールすると、折り紙のピガサスという翼のある豚を工夫したリチャード・ソーンダスのオリジナルの折り紙のポスターをダウンロードをすることができます。
Now it's time once again to tiptoe, not through the tulips, but to tiptoe into those digital archives at Trove. Trove.nla.gov.au, the online resource from the Australian Government and the National Library of Australia, digitised newspapers, gazettes, magazines, journals, periodicals, diaries, and so on. And this week I thought we'd make a slight variation, a slight deviation from our normal theme of the supernatural, the paranormal, and look at something that happened more than a century ago, the 1919 Spanish flu. And I thought this would be of particular relevance today during our current pandemic. What lessons can we learn? What similarities will we find? And our first entry comes from the Sydney Morning Herald, dated the 25th of February 1919. Mask prosecutions. Pleading guilty yesterday at the Central Police Court to the charge of being in an Oxford Street tram without wearing a mask, Elaine Lee, 19, was fined 20 shillings, in default 7 days imprisonment. Defendant said that she had her mask under her chin as she was suffering from catarrh. And incidentally, and I didn't know this, catarrh, according to a search, excessive discharge or build-up of mucus in the nose or throat associated with inflammation of the mucous membrane. We read on. For being in Oxford Street without a mask, Sydney Vincent Jones, 18, labourer, was fined 30 shillings, in default 10 days imprisonment. The prosecuting constable said that the defendant gave a wrong address. Frank Edward Roberts, 37, wharf labourer, was fined 20 shillings, in default 7 days imprisonment, for being in Elizabeth Street without a mask. For a similar offence in Belvoir Street, James Clark, 28, barman, was also fined 20 shillings. Clark said he understood that persons were not required to wear masks in unfrequented streets. And that newspaper clipping could have come from yesterday, with the fines and punishments, of course, being different. And incidentally, one of the fines here in Sydney at the moment, if you're out of your restricted area, or you've gone into another area, so to speak, is $1,000. And the fine for not wearing a mask when required is $500. The next clipping we find comes from sometime later, in fact 1948, on the 26th of May, in The Sun from Sydney, Australia. Sun readers say, nose bags for flu? And this appears to be a letter to the editor. If you hit a fellow citizen on the skull with a piece of 2x1 and put him into hospital for a week, you will, very properly, be sent to jail. But if you send a fellow citizen to bed for a week in persistent pain and distress by sneezing influenza germs over him, you remain as free as the birds and the germs of the air. Until disease carriers are taught that it is wantonly antisocial to distribute their germs far and wide in our compact communities, there can be neither sincere citizenship or sustained health in our crowded cities. Perhaps we could force some kind of responsibility on casual flu spreaders by obliging them to wear a mask. We did it once before in the Spanish flu epidemic. Why not make it a regular safeguard? LSB, Erskineville. And Erskineville being an inner west suburb of Sydney. Sounds like good advice to me. And now we go back to 1919, written on the 10th of February and published in the Grafton Argus and Clarence River General Advertiser. Influenza, the disease more deadly. Melbourne's terrible experience. Racing throughout New South Wales prohibited. There we are, even in 1919 they've got their priorities correct, putting up racing at the top of the article. Sydney, Friday night. The State Cabinet today decided to prohibit all racing throughout New South Wales until further notice. This means the cancellation of the Casino and Armidale meetings, of course. Altogether, there were 9 new cases in Sydney today, 4 of them on the 2 infected ships Dimboola and Wyandra at the quarantine station North Head. Dr. McMeekin of Melbourne Hospital says the infectivity of the disease there is increasing, all the cases now being admitted being of the pneumonic type. Queensland is still free of the epidemic, so is Tasmania and West Australia. And I'll just stop there to say this is really history repeating itself. It's amazing. This is very similar to the situation now in 2021. We read on. The government is preparing a scheme for the moratorium, which it has decided on to apply to all persons affected by governmental proclamations. A preliminary vote of £10,000 for relief of distress is to be made available by the State Treasury. The Director General of Health denies the prevalent assertion that masks are unhealthy. He says that if they are kept properly clean, the wearer doesn't rebreathe the same air. Dr. George Fox of Balmain today elected to go to jail instead of finding bail for refusing to wear a mask. The doctor said he considered masks unhealthy and gave reason also why he considered the proclamation illegal. The New South Wales government has decided to insure for £500 the lives of all hospital employees who are told off to attend influenza parties. Private Angus Mackenzie, an inmate of the influenza isolation ward at Randwick Military Hospital, has escaped. The military authorities regard the matter as serious and published a description of him in view of the possibility of Mackenzie spreading the disease. The military are particularly anxious to apprehend him. It is believed he went to the South Coast. Mackenzie's record is that he joined the forces twice. He was still serving a sentence for desertion when he left for England. Apparently, he arrived in England only to desert again. How he returned to Sydney, he refuses to divulge. Mr. Hunter, acting Premier of Queensland, said today, "The federal authorities are showing a callous disregard for their responsibility, and unless the states make a determined stand to protect the people from infection from overseas, the gravest results may ensue." The secretary of the Shop Assistants Union said today, The shops had a good time during the war, and it is up to them to be generous to their employees. None have actively closed yet, but hands have been reduced. The Board of Health have received a report concerning the death at Tyrol, allegedly due to pneumonic influenza. The report says that this is incorrect. The patient died from ordinary pneumonia, which had become septic. The reported case at Adleithen is also shown not to have been one of pneumonic influenza. According to the Melbourne newspaper reports, the disease is now evidently distributed all over Victoria. Yet many towns are still complaining that they cannot get vaccine. Good grief. Sorry, I have to stop again. This is amazing. This is really history repeating itself. It's just astonishing. We read on. Providing the different states are agreeable, the federal government expresses willingness to institute the passport system for interstate passengers. I'm sorry, when was this written? This is the Twilight Zone. This is really spooky. The Board of Health announces that 10 deaths occurred at Melbourne hospitals since midnight. This makes the total number of deaths 115. 25 new cases were admitted to the hospitals and 10 cases at the Children's Hospital who were suspiciously in for a couple of days are now declared to be suffering from the disease. Since the outbreak was reported, 1,927 cases have been admitted to the metropolitan hospitals. At the present time, 55 are dangerously ill. According to the figures of the Health Department, there has been a steady daily increase in the number of cases of influenza developing in the state since the end of January. It is now reported that there is a serious shortage of trained nurses in Victoria, many being infected and many overworked. It's like somebody wrote this yesterday. Let's read on. The Department of Health has telegraphed to New Zealand for 50 nurses immediately. The federal authorities in future will order the quarantining and examination of every overseas ship, whether she has visited an infected Australian port or not. Although the influenza figures are getting far more serious, the Victorian health authorities seem to be plodding quietly along as usual. No action has been taken on the advisory board's recommendations, and none of the regulations made are being observed. In official and political circles, the opinion is that Melbourne hotels will be closed next week during the epidemic. Liquor ordered will still be delivered. And what a note to end that extraordinary report. That is just amazing. Let me have another look to see when this was written. On the 10th of February, 1919. Can it get any more spooky than that? Well, let's look at the Newcastle Morning Herald and Miners Advocate, dated the 16th of January 1951. When flu raged in Australia. Interstate trade and travel were practically brought to a standstill by Commonwealth and state government restrictions in the pneumonic influenza epidemic of 1918-1919. The epidemic swept through Europe and Asia at the end of World War I. In Australia, state borders were closed and interstate and coastal ships met rigid restrictions at quarantine stations. The epidemic raged in Victoria, then spread to New South Wales. While scores of patients were being admitted to hospital each day in Sydney, a rigid check was kept on people leaving the city. All right, this is getting even spookier. This is exactly what's happening at the moment. All who left by train had to sign a declaration that they had, 1, not been in contact with an influenza patient for 3 days, 2, passed through an inhalation chamber in the 24 hours before travelling, 3, been inoculated within 3 months. In addition to these requirements, they needed a medical certificate stating they had no symptoms of influenza. Interstate travel on ships was similarly restricted. The quarantine station at North Head worked overtime, since all ships coming and leaving had to be held at quarantine for 4 days. At the government's request, a medical consultative council was formed. The council, mainly of doctors, advised the health department and municipal authorities throughout the epidemic. They recommended the use of masks, border restrictions, compulsory notification of patients and their early removal to hospital, as well as strict quarantine. The council advised people to avoid crowds, observe personal cleanliness, keep in the sunshine, and prevent spitting and dirty habits. Most doctors said overindulgence of alcohol was dangerous because it lowered resistance to infection. In Sydney, where the incidence was the highest in the state, health authorities closed theatres, picture shows and schools in the metropolitan area. Because of the risk of infection, church services, auction sales and race meetings were banned. A bylaw was passed forcing men and women to wear air filter masks. Police who patrolled the streets warned of the possibility of arrest of pedestrians continuing to walk with the masks slung about their necks. In the Central Court, those caught not wearing the filters in trains were fined £2. A judge in Banco Court was reprimanded for having appeared on the bench unmasked. Although everyone realized the danger of influenza, there were many complaints, some amusing. A commercial traveller complained bitterly that his country clients would not speak to him because they were scared of infection. Although he exclaimed he had not returned to the city since the epidemic, Stormen continued to keep him at bay. A Spaniard was exceedingly annoyed and said his home country had been slighted when the influenza was wrongly called Spanish flu. He claimed it had been taken to Spain by Russians. Writers condemned the position of North Head Quarantine Station and said it should be moved to a more isolated position. Many businesses had their own inhalation rooms where staff stood in the foggy interior before leaving work. On the railway station, passengers walked through a canvas-like maze, attempting to seek immunity before donning their masks for the train trip home. About October 1918, Newcastle residents evidently realised they would be fortunate if the epidemic did not reach the city. A start was made to clean up the municipality. A house-to-house inspection was made so a record could be kept of general cleanliness. Respirators were stocked in Newcastle shops, and continuous warfare was being waged against rats. Health Department inoculation centres, similar to those operating in Sydney, were set up in the municipality. In the first 2 months of 1919, 725,000 people were inoculated in New South Wales, including 225 from the country. And that, of course, meaning the regional areas outside of the city of Sydney. Thousands had died in Sydney and Melbourne before there was notification of a case in Newcastle, early in February 1919. The patient came from Islington and appeared to be an isolated case. A month later, when there was a lull in Sydney and the Medical Conservative Council recommended that masks were no longer needed, the epidemic started in Newcastle. On March 3, an influenza patient died in Newcastle Hospital. 2 days later, 5 nurses, a wardsman and a patient who had been in the same ward had caught influenza. In the following months, emergency hospitals at Wall's End and Warrattan, I think it says, it's hard to say because it's faded, received hundreds of patients. Each day, lists of the dangerously ill, seriously ill, and convalescent patients were published. With the epidemic, there came distress. Kitchens were opened in Newcastle District to feed those unable to fend for themselves. There was a shortage of staff at particularly all shops and offices. The post office staff was so depleted that telephone services were delayed and no telegrams were delivered for a period. In 2 years, 11,552 people died in Australia as a result of influenza. Other countries suffered far more. It is now estimated that about 20 million people died in the world in the 1918-1919 epidemic. And there we have it. Some eerie, spooky, uncanny Twilight Zone reports from the past, especially when we look at the similarities to today's situation. A real case of history repeating itself. And you too can find examples of history repeating itself by looking at the archives at Trove at trove.nla.gov.au. And as I like to say, you'll never know what you'll find. Thank you for listening to the Skeptic Zone as I walk around the park and see families enjoying a nice day out and an insect's just landed on my glasses. That's podcasting for you. Thank you to those people who continue to support the Skeptic Zone at Patreon or PayPal by visiting skepticzone.tv and clicking the link. Your support keeps the show going. And indeed, as you know, as I've discussed before, all my other normal sources of income have long since vanished for months now because of the pandemic. So I am very grateful indeed for those people who support the show. If the show means something to you, if you enjoy it every week, if you learn something, if it keeps you company, if you get pleasure from the show, then maybe you can consider becoming a supporter. Great to see kids running around being kids again. Coming up on next week's show, I think I'm going to look at TikTok. And believe it or not, I've started using TikTok. Well, I've posted a few cat videos. If you're interested, Richard_Saunders. I noticed that people like our friend Dr. Karl Kruszelnicki are on TikTok with good advice about vaccinations. And the Curiosity Show, that wonderful science show from the 1970s, is on TikTok. But I've also noticed there are lots of live tarot card readers on TikTok. Lots of live tarot card readers, presumably making a dollar or two. And people with pendulums, you know, thinking that they can actually use those to get mystical insights. Whereas, hello, another little insect on me, go away. Whereas you and I know they've succumbed to the idiomotor action. Regardless, it's all happening on TikTok. We might look at that next week. And a plane. Normally, I stop recording when the planes fly over, but today I think it's okay. But for this week, from Yeo Park here in the inner west part of Sydney, near the Skeptic Zone studios, this is Richard Saunders signing off.
You've been listening to the Skeptic Zone podcast. Please visit our website at www.skepticzone.tv for show notes, contacts, and to access the back catalogue of episodes going back to 2008. You can follow the Skeptic Zone podcast on Twitter at Skeptic Zone, visit our Facebook page, or leave a review on iTunes. You can also support the Skeptic Zone via Patreon or PayPal. The Skeptic Zone podcast is an independent production. The views and opinions expressed on the Skeptic Zone are not necessarily those of Australian Skeptics or any other skeptical organisation.
Stuart joy. It's
The
good.
moment I got my shots, it was like, wow, what a sense of relief.
So, folks,
I still can't believe
I
these
am
idiots
talking
who
with
don't
some of the
wanna do it.
people on the Great
It
Australian
felt good to see them, our friends getting vaccinated. That was really exciting. It was like a cheer.
I'm trying to
each time.
talk. I'm trying to talk with some of the
Host
people.
wants to talk.
Oh, come on now.
This is Rob Palmer, Susan Gerbic, and our very own Michelle Vickersma. Hello, everybody.
Hello, everybody.
What?
Hello, it's the Skeptical Fairy. Oh, you know the Skeptical Fairy, don't you, Michelle?
A little.
She's a friend of yours.
And I never see you in the same place.
Same
at
place
the same
together.
time.
Yeah, it never happens.
That's what I should do. I should write a sketch where Michelle goes to visit the Skeptical Fairy. I think that would be great.
It's because we're just merely acquainted.
Uh-huh. So we haven't done this for a few weeks. We're going to play the dice game. Now, I'm on Zoom with these people because we've just finished another session on the great... These people on the Great Australian Prediction Project. Let's do the dice game. I'll let you choose.
Almost done.
I've got a D60, a D20, a D30, D6, D4. What number? What?
All of them.
All right. First roll.
One for each round. One for each round.
All right. The first one, I'm holding that up. It's a D60. It's a 60-sided die. So
1 in 60 is going to be
1 in 60.
The odds are 1 in 60. It'll be a 5.
A 5, of course. Rob, what do you say?
It's just as likely as anybody else's number to come up. So
Yeah.
come on now. I know my math. I know my Collett's conjecture. Health string sequence 3x plus 1.
Ooh, you got it.
Come on now.
All right, so you said it's a 60. I will take random number that means nothing, 42.
42. Michelle.
Life, universe, and everything.
I'm going for 23. I was going to go with 3, but I thought that's kind of a bit of a missed opportunity on a 60-sided dice. I'll just up that a little bit to a 23.
All right, here it comes. As it rolls onto a 52.
Oh, almost 42.
Well, that's a 5.
2.
52.
We all make excuses for why it gets ours.
We all make
apply,
excuses.
apply your equation, Susan, to the 52. What do we get for
3x
next
plus
one?
1. Well, by the time I get to that.
Yeah, okay.
Now,
see.
a huge...
Reverse the numbers and divide by 5. 52 to 25,
You-
divide by 5.
You people are better than psychics making post-its. Okay, here we go. A four-sided.
7.
Four-sided.
Wait, that's not
we're
fair.
We're switching.
4.
Ooh. 4. I go for 4.
4.
It'll be a 5. It'll knock up onto the floor, and then the other guy will...
Susan still goes for 5, and Michelle.
Well, come on.
What do you say, Michelle?
I will still go for 3. I'll scale it back down
All right.
to suit the size of the dice.
And it is a 4.
Yes! That's the first time I've been right in months.
1 and 4.
All right, and we'll end with the traditional 6-sided. Here we go. And I'll get my nice rolling...
Get your Greg DeRay
Yep, there it is. The
rolling
machine.
device.
So, 6-sided, what do we have?
It's a 5.
A 5.
Well, I'm going to stick with 3.
3.
Since I got the maximum on the other die, 4, I'll go for 6.
And I'll hold this one up. I'm going to use this one. It's a South Point Casino die
South Point.
from the days of Tam. Look at
And
that.
Tam, the amazing meeting.
Here it comes. 2.
Michelle, you should have picked the 2
Nobody.
on the 23.
So today's winning numbers are
How did I not?
54, 4, and 2. And thank you, everybody.
That's not fair. I'm gonna. This game is
Hey,
rigged.
was that the first number 52?
All right. First number, 52.
You should look on the other side since you're in opposite land. In Australia.
One more chance for you, Susan. I'm going to use a D6. Ready?
Wait. Let me see. Let me see the die.
The standard one.
I see a 5. Move it around. Let me make sure it doesn't have 5 on every side. Okay. All right. Just checking.
Okay.
All right. Okay, got it.
Here it
Don't
comes.
let it out of your eyesight. Don't drip it below the. I see it.
Here it comes.
4.
3.
Oh,
Stupid game.
stupid.
Three, that was
Can't I get a win? Frustrating. So frustrating.